Okay, very good. அந்த ஸ்டூடெண்ட்ஸ் சொல்லணும்ல. சரி, ஓகே. பண்ணிங்க. நான் இன்னொரு இதுக்கு இங்கே நேராக போயிடுவா. இந்த விண்டோ தான் பெட்டரா? ஓகே, இங்கே எல்லாம் வந்துடுவாங்களா? சரி, ரீஃப்ரெஷ் பண்ணிடலாம். ஸோ அந்த ஸ்டூடெண்ட்ஸ் கொஸ்டின்ஸ்லாம் ரைட்டில் வரும்ல? சரி, ஓகே. அந்த கொஸ்டின்ஸ்லாம் கீழே வருமே, அதெல்லாம் இங்கே காணும். அப்போ தான் போட்ட அப்புறம் தான் வரும். ஓகே, போட்ட அப்புறம் தான் வரும். கரெக்ட் கரெக்ட். ஓகே, ரைட் ரைட் ரைட். சரி, ஓகே, தேங்க்யூ. ஐ ஜஸ்ட் வெயிட் ஃபார் எவ்ரிபடி டு கம். ஓகே. Yeah, we're just waiting to see if everybody can come in to the session. Sorry about the issues that we had earlier. And let me see if I could get all the comments in. Okay. Okay, so let's see if there are more folks joining. I will just wait till everybody comes in into the system. Sorry about the mess that was earlier in the first 20 minutes or so of the live streaming for decision making under uncertainty. What I'm going to do first is to see if there are any questions that you all have. I did notice a few comments in the front, which I will try and address as I go forward. Okay, I'm just going to first just type up something and then kind of go from there. Okay, my plan right now, we have a little over half an hour, is mainly to answer your questions as well as try and see if I could, talk a little bit about various things in the course, such as things that have come up so far, like the octave part and such. Okay, so let us just wait for maybe a few seconds so that everybody comes into this system, because right now we had about a lot more people watching in the beginning. As everybody comes in, we will start. Okay. So essentially, you want me to go a bit louder? Okay, no, that's not a problem. Is this better now? Is the volume better now? Okay. All right, I know it takes about 20 seconds by the time I say something and you all hear, so I just have to be a little bit patient. Now, uh, so let us see if we have any specific questions, uh, that I could help answer. Okay, thank you. So go ahead and please type your questions, and I will take a look at it and see how best to answer. I do have some things that I anyway want to talk about, um, and we could kind of go from there. Okay. All right. So, given the fact that we have about 10 folks already in and a few others who will probably be trickling in, let me just go ahead and and kind of get started for the most part. Like I said, we have about half an hour. Uh, go ahead and send me your questions, and I will try to respond to them as we go. However, it's also important for me to talk about a few very quick things. So, one thing is, a lot of folks. Oh, let me first see how I could transition to the screen. Let me see if that works out well. And I'm hitting transition, and I will see if I could modify my screen in some ways. Uh, Good. Okay. I'm not sure if you are. Yeah. I did click transition. So, however, I don't think you're seeing the screen that I was hoping you would. Let me check one more time. Okay, so the first question what sort of questions will come in the exam, or from an exam point of view? A few quick things about that. I know students like to ask questions about exam all the time because, after all, finally you're getting a certificate that is based out of how much you score in the exam. So that's a fair question, although that is not my favorite questions to answer because it doesn't answer the basic question: what are we learning from this course? However, I will still go ahead and answer. So the questions, will be like there will be multiple choice questions, there will be true or false questions, which is also basically multiple choice with two choices, and then there will be a couple of workout problems, and to fill in the blanks with the answer, and so on. So I think there's probably going to be one long problem, and uh, uh, so the question is, while doing the assignment, we have online. This is the next question: online resource and Octave. But what about the exam? How do we do it? But yeah, I do know that in the exam, of course, you will not have Octave. I mean, there will be no questions on Octave in the exam. I think I'm not 100% sure, but I'm somewhat certain about it. You don't have to use Octave in the exam. And the idea is as follows: that you've understood the material, the basics well enough to be able to go ahead and do well in the exam. So essentially, what will be tested in the exam is how well you're understanding, or how well is your understanding of the material. you know I do want to say a little bit about a topic. I don't know if I'm not getting the screen to be viewed very nicely, but let me just nonetheless let me try and see. If you Google the word Bloom's taxonomy, okay, the Bloom's taxonomy kind of tells you, a lot of times when students study, they are essentially trying to recall stuff in the course. That is really the lowest level. Okay, where I expect you to be is way, way, way above that. We've just gotten used to so much in going to school and college, just remembering facts and just regurgitating in the exam. That is not what this is about. What we are at least going is at least one step above it. How well you understood so that you can solve things in the exam. So essentially, what will be tested is your understanding of the material. So essentially, what you need to be sure is that, do I understand all this really, really well? And if yes, that sounds good. So that's why this session is there. We will have another live session sometime after the end of the course, where we will ask specific questions about the exam. So you'll have time to ask questions that are not very clear. So if there is some concept that is not very clear, you have to take care of that. 75% of your exam score is based on, 70% of the course grade is based on the exam. Okay. The next comment is exam is sticking or not? Can you say a little bit more about what do you mean by is exam is sticking or not? If my if TA or anybody else who's on it can explain that would be well. Basically, you're asking if it's hand done. Yes, I think you have to. It is not on the it is on the computer. You have to pick the answer and so on. But I think you just have to shade everything finally. I'm not 100% sure how it works. I'll give you an answer to that in the course website. Okay. Okay. All right. So there's a question about which one is more applicable: fuzzy decision making, intuitionistic fuzzy decision making, gray decision making methods. Okay, so let me go. Okay, so let me see how I can answer that. I am personally not a big fan of anything that says the word fuzzy, because fuzzy is not really grounded firmly in terms of theory. It is just so let me just say that, of course anything is applicable. There is no reason about it. And in fact, even, people have done all kinds of very impressive and interesting things using stuff like fuzzy, because it's a very convenient, quick, comfortable way of doing things, such as, even things like deep learning, neural networks. All these things are very loose in terms of how they're connected, to sound theory. So yes, I think they're all pretty good. So now let me see. Okay, so then there are questions about. Oh, thank you for your kind words. If there are any questions, please do let me know. So the question is about how difficult the exam will be. Generally, what will be difficult is usually the assignments. I tend to give much harder assignments so that you are extremely well prepared to take the exam. And I think only when you ask deep and unconnected questions in the assignment, you start digging a little bit and finding answers to things. It doesn't. It's not that. I don't think it should be as difficult. If you're comfortable in the assignment, you should be really comfortable in the exam. However, like you all said, I will look at the exam and ask around a little bit more about the format. In particular, I just heard from the others who are running this course that this is. Are there going to be multiple choice questions? Yes, there will be multiple choice questions, and like I said, there will either be one of 4 choices or one of 2, which is called true or false. Okay. Okay. Now, for the news vendor problem, if we have past data, how do we use a distribution? So if you have past data, what you normally do, and you have to be a little bit careful about this, but if you have past data, what you normally do is to fit a distribution to the past data. So for example, you have these values, and then you plot and see what distribution works out well. In fact, if none of the distributions work, if you have a lot of past data, what you would do is just use that empirical data. Just see, for example, it will say wherever the CDF, the cumulative distribution function, let's say equals 0.8, that's the point you want. You see where, at what value 80% of them are smaller. Now, having said this, there are two very, very important things to worry about when you use past data. The first important thing that you need to be worried about is whether you have complete data. So what I mean by that is, now for example, if your demand is higher than what you actually had, there is no way for you to know what is the actual demand, right? For example, let's say you have 10 items in your inventory, and if you had a demand of 12, you'll never know that. That is actually the difficult thing sometimes. The second thing is, is your data independent and identically distributed? If that is the case, then you're good to go. Now, that's another thing to be concerned about. A lot of times there are trends, and you have to be careful about that. Now, given all that, if you have adjusted for all that, it's possible. We can surely address this in somewhat detail, maybe even in a follow-on talk or something like that. Now, there's a question here that says, how can we answer NPTEL course? I'm not sure I exactly understand that question. Can you please clarify the question? Then the next question, I'm very curious to know about how these NPTEL videos are made. I can say very, very quickly. Well, I actually went, if you're asking how my NPTEL videos were made, well, I went to IIT Madras and I recorded all these videos in a wonderful studio, and the people in NPTEL did a phenomenal job of making it happen. Then they did a great job of actually editing the videos and correcting, and we have a huge team of people that are helping out. So thanks to them, all this works out really well. Now, thanks, Lakshmi, for the answer about, yes, this will be, like you said, will be entered on the computer, and there'll be multiple choice fill in the blanks and so on. So you'll enter everything on the computer. Thank you, Lakshmi. For the multi-arm bandit, how was 432 and 100 selected for repeat? Either it was really arbitrarily selected. I could have pretty much, selected something else as well. So I just wanted to give you a flavor for if you did very small versus something that is medium versus something that is large. But it's very arbitrary. The next is, I have a question. Is the distribution for demand in the news vendor problem dependent on the selling and cross price? Okay, very good. No, this is a deep question. Okay, so I am assuming that the cost price and the selling price are not changing every day. Okay. So when you build a distribution, so therefore you only have one selling price and one cost price. Now, what if the cost price and selling price actually change with time? Now, that is very practical, happens all the time, especially in airlines and so on. In fact, airlines use the news vendor problem quite a bit to figure out what price to charge for the ticket. Because the number of seats, if you think about it, is like a perishable inventory. And as soon as the flight takes off, all those seats are gone. They actually do something like that. So they kind of figure out what will be the demand for various pricing structures and kind of go from there. So one option is to have different distributions for various cost structure, or rather various selling price structure, and then go from there. Clearly, a cheaper item does have more demand. The next question is, let me know if my questions are not, your questions are not answered adequately. I will be happy to explain further. The next question is, Pareto Principle of 80-20 useful and has probability foundation? Yes, indeed. So that's an excellent question. In fact, a lot of times people do not give the probabilistic foundation. There is a distribution called the Pareto distribution. I think it is possible to look it up on Wikipedia, if not anywhere else. And Wikipedia has a wonderful article about the Pareto distribution. That's another distribution, much like exponential and all the others that we've seen. And in the Pareto distribution, if you put certain parameters, you will see that it is what's called a heavy-tailed or a fat-tailed distribution, which has this 80-20 thing. Well, 80-20 is a very generic term. It's come out of industry because a lot of times, many companies have this situation where they say, well, 20% has of the problems are, I'm sorry, 80% of the problems are from 20% of the products that they make, or things like that. This has 80-20 is often used. It does have a probability foundation, especially in the Pareto distribution. What will be the structure of 75 marks exam? I think we answered that question several times before. Multiple choice questions, true or false, a couple of problem solving, and so on. I'm not sure how to answer what's going on. I am answering questions that people are asking, and so that's kind of what I'm doing. Okay, why is the video still buffering? I see. I'm not sure if others are having these buffering situation, but turns out that you guys are about 20 seconds after, you'll hear what I'm saying, 20 seconds after I say something. So that's kind of how it is set up, but I'm not sure why you're having buffering issues. Now, coming back to a couple of very interesting points, and I should remember to note them and maybe add on to those, especially in terms of the news vendor. So in practice, that's kind of what they do. In fact, many times in the news vendor problem, what happens in practice is what happens in practice in the news vendor situation is that they will have, like, different days of the week will have different demands. That happens a lot. Or there are different seasonalities and so on, and they kind of adjust the news vendor problem model according to that. Okay, those are all very ad hoc ways of doing things, but it works really well. The next is what kind of questions we will get. So again, I think you will get questions that are of multiple choice and true or false and so on. These will be based mainly on topics that are covered in the course, where I'm testing your fundamental understanding of what is going on in the course. So if you've done the assignments well, there is some base level of knowledge that you would have gained, and we kind of going to ask questions based on that. So, like, for example, how well you understand like the news vendor problem, or how well you understand what's a safety stock. It is not just plugging and chugging that is important. What I'm really testing you is, how much of conceptual understanding you're having. So then, is the Pareto principle based on EOQ? I don't think so. The Pareto principle essentially I don't think has anything to do with EOQ, to the best of my knowledge. EOQ essentially says how much to order, and the Pareto principle tells me that, which essentially says, this is when things, it's there all over the place. It's not just in reliability. There are several things, like internet has an 80-20. Facebook, if you see social networks, have 80-20 Pareto principle. Like, for example, 80% of the messages will come from 20% of your friends. Okay, that is known as the Pareto principle. So that means unusually large majority of things come from an unusually small minority. So in fact, in the heavier tail stuff, it could even be 90-10. That means 90% of your messages come from 10% of your friends on a social media. Okay, that is called Pareto principle. I don't think it has any connection to EOQ per se. Which subject you link most in which you're currently teaching in Texas? So that's a very good question. Now, actually, this specific course, Decision Making Under Uncertainty, I've actually never taught at Texas A&M. It's just a collection of a bunch of things that I put together specially for this. However, I do teach parts of this in several. In fact, every single topic, I think, or every single week, is one course by itself. There's a course on week 1, there's an entire course on just probability and random processes that I teach. The week 4, in fact, there are 2 courses, one of which I teach, which is on stochastic processes, Markov chains, and my colleague teaches a course on stochastic optimization, which is another course. Plus, there are the other topics also we kind of teach based on whether it's in queuing topics or whether it's inventory topics. There are courses separately. So these are all parts of various other courses. Okay. Okay. Oh, demand. Oh, so you're asking about demand, and so the question is about demand versus Pareto. Yeah, can demand have that structure? Yes. So turns out that for a specific item, unlikely that you're going to have a very heavy tail distributions for demand. So let's think about this. Okay, this is a very, very interesting question. Let's think about this. Now, let's say in the news vendor situation, will you get something like a Pareto principle? So Pareto principle is essentially what's called heavy tail. That means there is a high probability that you'll get numbers that are there's a decently high probability that you'll get numbers that are extremes. Okay. The standard deviation usually in a Pareto will be much larger than the mean. The standard deviation, once again, will be much larger than the mean. You normally won't have daily distributions having that property. Will not be a Pareto distributed demand. Generally you'll have demand that's a lot more bounded, if you will. Okay. Now, where it will be, for example, is let's say you have a warehouse with tens of millions of products, then you will see the Pareto principle. That means 80% of your demand will be for 20% of your items. But a single item's demand from day to day will probably not have a Pareto distribution. Okay, that's what I think, unless you're having some really crazy type of things. For example, things like events like hurricanes and tsunami, and all these are very rare events, and once they happen, so the time between them could be either extremely large, it could be extremely small. It's extraordinarily difficult to predict. Okay, so those are the types of situations where you would use something like Pareto, where there's a large amount of variability. Okay, so essentially to think about it is, if your standard deviation is much larger than the mean, then you are looking at the Pareto principles coming in. Okay, so now the next, what else is being asked? So sure. So we were talking about just the there are several companies in particular that use the news vendor problem or the safety stock and so on to figure out how much inventory to carry. This is whether it is for finished products or even for products that are raw material. They kind of use these things very often, and is extraordinarily useful. But you have to be very careful in the way in the way you make sure that things are modeled properly. Okay. Will the NPTEL test be easy or difficult? That's a question. That's a hard. I believe it's easy, of course, right? Otherwise, I shouldn't be teaching the course. I think if you study and you spend a decent amount of time understanding the concepts, the exam will be easy. I think it is really a function of how much time and effort you put in and how deep your understanding is. I think there are enough people who in this course who are getting 90 plus, which is very nice. And I do think, I do anticipate a large number of people doing well. All right. Our industries really refer to these methods for decision making, which are covered in this course. The quick answer is yes, certainly. Now, our industries use, are they using all these methods? Well, we are still talking about extremely basic levels of this. So, for example, if you go to a company like one of the airline companies, or people who do pricing, they have a lot more sophisticated models than this. This is just very, very bare bones type of things, and that's why the examples are also not. So now in practice what will happen is, let's say in the news vendor type of situations, you're really going to have a large variety of items, tens of thousands of SKUs, okay, stock keeping units, and so on. So this is so for example, are you talking about a specific thing? Like, yes, I think they will use news vendor, or they would use safety stock, or I'm just giving those two as an example. But in week 4, for example, stochastic programming is extraordinarily well used by a lot of people. Markup decision process is used, for example, even in very basic things. Like if you take your phone and you see how nicely the voice recognition is done. Voice recognition is done through a very simple extension of what we will see in week 4, where we're getting some signals, and you have to figure out what the signal is about. So yes, it is everywhere. So that's the quick answer. Now there are a few more questions that have come in the meantime. Can you give us some tips which we can use for quick decision making in our lives? I really like that question. So essentially, human decision making and human situations are not easy. I completely sympathize with you when you are considering about human decision making. And one of the things is that when we make decisions, you have to first see who are the people who are going to be impacted. Can I characterize some of these decisions in a mathematical form? Many times it is not. And in that case, what do you do? So the essential questions when you make is understand what your alternatives are. If you're discrete and countable, then that's great. And then I would say in life to say what are the simplest ways, what are the pros and cons, what am I gaining by making this decision, what am I losing, and kind of go from there. But I think this is a very wonderful question, and many times a lot of people make irrational decisions on the surface, but you don't know what made them do certain things. Okay. At this point of time, can I provide my email address? Well, I can, but I think the way NPTEL, we would like to keep everything through the system. I think because of the way this is done, I would like everything to come through NPTEL. Okay, and where would one use gamma distribution? So, where one would use, so gamma distribution is, okay, so gamma distribution, if you look at the curve, it looks a lot like the normal distribution, except it can never take negative values. So it has that jump in the middle. However, it also has some wonderful properties in that the mean and the standard deviation are actually quite easily, you can write it down quite easily. So when you have real data and you want to fit a distribution, it is very common for people to use the gamma distribution. Like, for example, if you collected, let's say, the demand distribution and then demand data from historical whatever you have data, and then you find out, let's say, the mean is 10 and the standard deviation is let's say 4, you want to fit a distribution. I think a gamma distribution, especially, you should plot and see if it looks like gamma. If it does, you should go ahead and use it. It is a very commonly used distribution when things kind of look like normal. However, negative values are not permissible. So when in that situation, I would always use gamma as a choice. Of course, you always have to draw the curve. Okay, please don't miss doing that. If you had something totally different, then that would not be an appropriate thing to do. Are there any other NPTEL courses that I'm teaching? The answer is no, not at this point of time at least. Maybe sometime in the near future. This is my very first experience. We will look into some options in the near future. Okay, that's a very good question. How do you know what kind of distribution by just observing a small sample? Now, when you have a small sample, what happens is, almost any distribution will fit, and that's the downside. Okay, However, if you take the mean and the standard deviation of that very small sample, I'm assuming you at least have about 20 or 25. If not, I think at that point of time, you are better off doing some other things. Now, let me give you an example of that. Okay, let's say one wants to do something like uh, come up with a distribution for, say, the time between two earthquakes. Okay, the earthquakes are extremely rare. Now, what do you do? So then, you really don't take this approach for situations like that. I would say if you had 3 or 4 data points. Now, if you are in a situation where this happens often, but you want to start doing something with a few data points, that is perfectly all right. In fact, a large amount of what we do does not really need data. It could kind of be validated for the most part. The next question is, what is the basic structure of the science of decision making? Like we have DSS system. Well, a decision support system is is essentially something like this. Now, there is no major difference between a decision support system. You can build one for any type of system that you have. Usually, we tend to tailor a decision support system to our system that we have. And like, for example, if you work for a certain type of company, then you will build one for yourself. You have a dashboard. Dashboards are fairly common and things like that. So, I think, I think basically, you can have a decision support system, but the science of decision making is deeply rooted in a lot of operations research methods, and there are tons of those types of courses even in NPTEL that I would highly recommend that you take. Okay. Right. So the question is about right thing and wrong thing. Yeah, pros and cons essentially is what I'm trying to say when I say yes, that's right. Uh, uh, right. Exactly. I mean, so many times what happens is when you make decisions, you really don't have an understanding of the mathematical functional form itself. And I think that is a very important and critical thing to keep in mind. Uh, and therefore, your best bet is what makes sense. For example, let's say you are interested in getting a two-wheeler. Now you don't have a whole bunch of data for that. You're just saying, okay, is now a good time to buy a two-wheeler, or shall I just take the bus for 1 year? Hopefully, in 1 year, I would maybe get a job and have a decent salary. Is it worth it? And this is where you have to really put down your pros and cons. Things like, a scooter costs or a two-wheeler costs so much. And right now, if I use, this is what will happen. And however, this is the benefits of it. I will come home quickly. I can watch a few more NPTEL courses and do well in it, and that might give me a better job in the future. So I think those are the types of pros and cons you have to list and figure out how to go about it. Are there some apps to use for probability function, feed and data and get decisions? Ooh, okay. Now you can feed data and get probability functions for sure. And in fact, there is a software called At Risk, and there are some simulation software that will actually give you the appropriate distributions to use, and so on. However, I think I would strongly warn against feeding data and getting decisions, because many times, you don't know what has gone into those things. In fact. I don't know, in the intro video, I think we talk about these 3 basic forms of data-based analytics. One is what is called descriptive analytics, where you just describe what's going on. The other one is predictive analytics, we're trying to predict, and then one is called prescriptive. So a lot of times people are not happy doing prescriptive analytics, because many times it is not clear what is it's not clear whether you're using the right function and so on. But if you do, and if you have a very standard structure, of course, there are libraries in Python, there are libraries and other things that will exactly do this for you. So that's kind of what it is. Yes, that's right. So there are in Quora as well. You could do something like that. Good. What subject I like to teach? I guess many of them. I think I would enjoy teaching all the operations research like courses. My main area is in the probabilistic side of things. So, and I teach a course on queuing theory quite a bit. And of late I've become interested in data-driven decisions. So we'll see how that goes. What is the scope of research in uncertain supply chains? I'm assuming by that what you mean is supply chains with tremendous amount of uncertainty. Is there a lot of research to be done? Yes, certainly. I think this day and age, there are a couple of things that are extremely important. One is that we have a lot of information. That means we can get all kinds of stuff from everywhere. And because of that, what happens is you can make a lot more cleverer decisions. You also have a lot of historical data. And I think that is changing the landscape in a lot of ways. In fact, if you think about it, a lot of these large firms, whether it is your Flipkart, Amazon, and so on, use this a lot in actually making decisions. And there's a lot of scope for doing research, because even now it is not perfectly well done. There's a lot of gaps in terms of forecasting. There's a lot of gaps in terms of what is the best way of moving things around from source to destination. So from a supply chain point, yes, certainly there is a lot. There's another question about data means we have historical, master, or current data. I'm not exactly sure what is master, but you're right. I think historical data and current data, I think I have an idea of what master is, but historical data and current data are both useful. When I say current data, that's interesting. What I mean is my current state, okay, as opposed to, like for example, from an inventory standpoint, let's say you are working in a company and you are interested in keeping inventory of certain items. The amount of inventory level right now is what I call as current. However, you could think of current being the last 30 days versus historical much before that. If you're talking about that, then yes, we need to really think about these things. A lot of times, very old data is not potentially very useful because a lot has changed. You have to be sure that you have things that are still applicable. Now, many times demand changes a lot, and you have to use more current data. The idea of using master, if my understanding is correct, what you mean by that is to have a certain data that is not necessarily from where you are, but applies elsewhere. For example, there was some work that we did in solar forecasting, and you have solar data in certain places. You don't have the data in another location, but you still want to decide whether or not to put a solar farm there. And then once you put, what kind of batteries you want to keep. These are expensive decisions, because if you had a large battery, that means you need to get that kind of power coming in and out, and if they are more expensive, and so you have to make such decisions. Then yes, having a master type of thing would be a good idea. Are there PhD programs in decision making under uncertainty? Well, I think most operations research PhD programs, whether it is in the engineering school or the business school or even in a science school, do offer that. And I think there will be, you won't get a degree exactly in that, but you will get a degree in operations research, which will exactly do that. Okay, and we want to see outline about decision making under uncertainty. I thought if you go into the intro slide, we talk a little bit about the outline about decision making under uncertainty. Let's see if that does not answer your question. If there's something very specific, I'll be happy to address that. Will these techniques change drastically in black swan situations where there is no precedence available? Right now, that is so. Let me say two things about this. The first thing that I do want to say is that a lot of the probabilistic decision making are actually very amenable to black swan situations. By that, what I mean is, we really don't need data to build distributions. We're just coming up with ways of finding out a lot of these things based on what we know about the situations. Let me give you an example. Let's say one wants to go to the moon and back. You have to figure out what will be the what type of situations one could encounter, and you'll have to kind of make this based on various situations, like, if I do this, then what happens? If this is what happens, you'll try out many different things, and then go from there. But the quick answer is that yes, you can, and you have to try various what if type of scenarios, and therefore yes. Actually, interestingly, a lot of the probabilistic decision making was not from having real availability of data. I think that is an important point to remember. But these days, when a lot of data is available, people have started to use this in actually data-driven decisions, and I think I do want to emphasize that. Now, the second point I do want to make is, in many situations when you have a black swan type situation, you don't have any distribution, and you don't even know what it would look like, then you really have to look at other techniques to solve the problem. That is another thing that I wanted to say. Okay. In terms of time, we are running out because I believe this is supposed to end at 8 p.m. Your time. And so I am, if there aren't too many more questions, we will go ahead and, wind up right now. But please do let me know. I'll just wait for another 10 or 15 seconds to see if there are any more questions. If not, we will conclude the session. Okay, so thank you very much. It was a pleasure answering all these questions. I really appreciate everything that you have asked. What we will do is, towards the end of the semester, rather after the end of the semester, before the exam, we will have another review session. What I recommend is that you go ahead and study all the items in the course. Go over the videos one more time if you can, and in fact the transcripts also might be available through closed caption. Ask your questions, and I think redo the assignments if possible, and you will be in a very good position. But despite that, if you had questions, it'll be important for you to be able to if you have questions, it'll be important for you to be able to address them in the next session that we will have. You can ask very pointed questions in that session about the course content itself, and I will, I think the two TAs will do a fantastic job of addressing those. They're way more proficient with this technology. There are couple of very quick questions that have come up. I will answer that. The world is dynamic and samples are evolving. Is there a dynamic model available? So there are two ways that we look at dynamism. One is, things with trends, and a lot of times people do forecast with trends and find a way to model dynamically. The other type of dynamism is where you have your states itself changing a lot, which we touch upon in week 4. Okay. And who will be the decision maker? Now that is a very important question. Now who is going to make the final call? The reason many times a CEO gets fired is because they are the final, the people who finally say yes or no. So yes, I think usually the responsibility really lies in the top person. This is true even if we are in a political situation. The buck stops at the highest person in the organization. Okay, so I will stop here. Thank you very much. I had a wonderful time presenting this. I look forward to